Hey everybody, today we are talking about Plum Pudding Murder by Joanne Fluke. The story starts out 10 days before Christmas, and Hannah has just made plum pudding to try out at a shop that is centered around a Christmas tree lot, but there's also other shops there that you can buy decorations as well as presents for your kids for Christmas. And the owner, Larry, has asked for cookies and also wants something a little bit different, and they came up with the idea of maybe doing plum pudding. And so Hannah drops some off for Larry to try out, and then she's going to come back later to see how it goes and also pick up a check for the cookies that she also has been providing. So our story actually starts with this night, and Larry is actually the one that gets killed. And it happens in the very first chapter, and so we already know that a murder has taken place. But then the next chapter goes the day before, and so now we're back in time, and we have all of this story to get developed until they actually find out that he has been killed. So something that's very interesting about this for me is that plum pudding is something, rather Christmas pudding is something that I have never made before. And it's a little daunting to me. In fact, I've never made anything with a bundt cake before, or with a bundt pan. So this is actually the first time I've ever used this. I just barely bought it for this recipe. And so I'm a little nervous because I don't know how it'll turn out, especially because I've never made a Christmas pudding before. So hopefully this turns out. Another thing to note is that I always try my best to get the recipe to be as accurate as possible. However, I could not find canned plums for plum pudding. And historically, plum pudding didn't even use plums. It just used other things like raisins or figs or just any other kind of dried fruit, not necessarily plums. But she just wanted it to be with plums so that it could genuinely be plum pudding. And so I tried my best, but I could not find these. The only thing that I could find after searching 3 stores was prunes, which I know is kind of the same thing, but not. My only concern is by using prunes is that we're going to be losing some of the moisture content that would come from canned plums, since these are dried. Hopefully it doesn't make too much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. We will find out together, but that is what we're going to use instead of actual canned plums, because that's the best I could do. We're going to go ahead and get started on making it, and then we can continue talking about what happens in the rest of the story. So the first step is we are going to need to generously butter and flour our pan. We don't want it to get stuck when it comes to flipping it upside down to take it out at the end of the cooking process. So we start with that, and then we are going to start cutting our bread. Okay, so while I am cutting this bread, we will continue our story. We go back in time. It's the day before any murder has happened, and the town is just preparing for Christmas, getting all the shopping taken care of. Hannah is very busy getting her orders in for all the festivities and for the Christmas tree lot, which she is getting orders for like every day. Norman's mom, Carrie, is being really suspicious and canceling plans on Dolores, which is who's Hannah's mom, and also on Norman. Like, her own son is not being able to do dinners with her as often as they do, or with him as often as they do. And so they're both a little bit concerned about this, and Hannah says, well, I'll try to figure it out. So eventually they find out that Carrie is seeing somebody, and secretively, and so they try to figure out who this person is. So that is happening. And another thing, that while they were at the Christmas tree lot the night before the murder, they were trying to get some Christmas trees for Andrea's daughter's classroom. They get a class tree every year, and they're in charge of getting it this year. So they go to the Christmas tree lot to get one of those trees, a small tree for the classroom. And while they're there, Norman decides to buy Hannah a tree. And Hannah's never had a tree before because, well, she's got a cat and she doesn't know how that's gonna work out. And it turns out that her cat definitely does not like this tree being in there. Like the very next day that it's put up, less than 12 hours, he's already managed to knock the entire tree over. And so they have to come up with all these unique ways to try to make a tree a possibility for her, because she does love the fresh smell that a real tree brings into her home, but it's just really dangerous to leave her cat alone with this tree. And so that's another thing that's going on throughout this book. There's also a story of another thing that's going on where Dolores was supposed to be going to with Carrie to these business classes for good business practices and figuring out bad practices. Since they own an antique shop together, Dolores wanted to get better at making sure she was making good business decisions. And so she has Hannah go with her because Carrie canceled again. And so they go and they're learning about business practices and things. And while they're figuring all of this stuff out in the class, they are realizing that a lot of the examples and things that they are explaining as good and bad business practices, a lot of the bad practices seem to be what Larry is doing. So that's a little concerning because Hannah's getting paid to do cookies for him, and the mayor also went in on it a little bit to invest in this business with him to make it work and stuff. And so when he finds out about this, he's a little concerned that it seems like something that Larry's doing is a little fishy. So eventually, the next day, Hannah goes to see if she can pick up the check that she needs and pick up the pan that had the plum pudding samples and stuff for him to eat and try and see if he liked. It was time for them to go over and grab that stuff. So while they were over there, that's when they discover the body. And technically Norman discovers the body this time. Hannah notices something fishy. She feels uncomfortable automatically because no one answered the door. But Norman's like, he knows we're supposed to be coming here, so let's just open the door and come in because it's unlocked. So they go in and she still feels a little unsure about it until eventually she looks over and she's like, what's that? And Norman goes over and sees that it's Larry lying down and there's a bullet hole in him, and checks his pulse, and yeah, he's dead. So technically Norman did find him this time, but Hannah was still there. So yeah, she still seems to be finding dead bodies all the time, like normal. And so that is how she discovers the body. And then of course that is how they end up calling Mike, and she ends up getting into her little sleuth zone where she has to figure out who it is and who done it all over again. So yeah, so basically that is the idea of this story, is trying to figure out why Larry did this. Probably because there are some bad business practices. Maybe he's been screwing some people over. Maybe he's been writing some checks. They think they're getting this amount, but he's actually writing it up for a different amount. And so somebody probably figured out what he was doing and hunted him down for revenge. And so she has to figure out who this is. And there's a couple of little things that kind of makes her feel like maybe it's this person, maybe it's this person. Girl who happens to be named Courtney. So she's the fiance who's also helping with the business for the Christmas tree lot. She thinks there's probably something fishy about the books. She's not really sure about what he's doing, but she doesn't really know too much about, because he's owned several businesses and been cooking the books in a lot of them, and she doesn't know about all those. And so she's kind of a suspect. Also kind of a suspect is Dr. Love, who's this like radio person who does a radio show about marriage advice and love advice and all that stuff, relationship stuff. And apparently she had a history with Larry a long time ago. And so she's a suspect because she had previous relations with him before he came back to Lake Eden. And so yeah, so there's multiple suspects, and those are just two of them. And so figuring out which puzzle pieces fit where to figure out who actually did it is, of course, for some reason, always landing on Hannah, and somehow she always figures it out before the cops do, nearly almost every time. Or even if it's just a couple hours before, she almost always seems to be just a little bit ahead, and she always makes decisions that are not great, which is not waiting for backup or waiting for someone or telling someone where she's going to be and telling someone, hey, by the way, I think it's this person, I'm going to go and check something. And instead of, like, you know, having someone with her, a lot of times she goes alone. And you'd think that after 12 books of these, 12 and a half or something, she would have learned her lesson by now and she would have some backup, because she gets into another dangerous situation. This one probably the closest to getting herself killed. There's another one where she gets stuck in a car. That was pretty early on in the series, and it gets like starts getting lifted up in the air to get crushed. That was really close. This one though, this one to me, I feel like felt even more scary because she was getting shot at. And you know, like one shot too many, and she's in the wrong place at the wrong time, she's gone. So she needs to get better at taking care of herself. But yeah, essentially that is what our story is about. And her plum pudding ends up being a big success, by the way. So we're gonna see if that happens with mine. So let's, I'm going to continue to get the rest of this bread cut, and we will layer it. We'll have the bread first, and then we will have the prunes, and then the golden raisins, and then some butter, melted butter, and then some sugar, and then we just do that a couple of times until the entire thing is filled up with our fruit and our bread and our butter and our sugar. And then we also will put a little bit of cinnamon in there at some point, and then we will after that have to make our custard base that is going to be going on top of it to soak into the bread. And essentially that'll be like the last step before it goes into the oven. However, we do have to wait 30 minutes for it to fully incorporate all the custard into the bread, soak it all the way up, so that when it starts to get heated in the oven, it will be evenly distributed through all the pieces of bread, so we can get this nice gooey pudding by the end of it. All right, our plum pudding is out of the oven, and unfortunately we cannot cut into it for another 20 minutes. It has to rest in this bundt pan for another 20 minutes before we try to turn it over and get it out of here. I'm sure part of that is so that it can continue to bake even more outside of the oven, and also so that it doesn't fall apart if we try to take it out too soon. It smells glorious. It definitely smells really good. We're gonna just hope that it's good, and in 20 minutes from now we will flip it over, get it out, cut it, and finally give this plum pudding a taste. Wow! Wow, look at that. It worked. So there is supposed to be a sauce that goes on top of this, and in the process of making it, this is what happened, and clearly it is not a sauce. And I tried to fix it and by adding powdered sugar, but then I ran out of powdered sugar, so I'm not gonna use this. So unfortunately we don't get to have that pretty look of the cream on there, of the sauce, but I just put a little bit of a regular glaze on there just to give it a little bit more, but yeah, this will still be fine, and we're gonna go ahead and give it a taste now. All right, I went ahead and got a little slice of it. I'm gonna taste it just how it is, and then I'm going to add a little bit of whipped cream so that we can still have some kind of cream factor to it. But anyways, I'm gonna try to get that plum or that prune. Okay, so It definitely tastes like your typical bread pudding, which I don't know, in my head I just imagined that it was gonna be different than a bread pudding, but once I started making it and realized what ingredients were in at least this version of it, because I did look it up out of curiosity, figgy pudding and other recipes that I found, they use flour and sugar and like the basic kind of like cake like recipe ingredients, whereas this was straight up bread, so of course it was going to be more of a bread pudding style than more of like a cake. And so that's something that's definitely different from Hannah's Minnesota plum pudding versus a figgy pudding or a more cake-like pudding that has more of like a chocolate looking, like a more of a brown looking cake style, whereas this is a lot lighter in color. And with all the butter in there and sugar in there, there's a crisp edge, which is really nice because it balances out the more moist pieces from the custard. The actual plum is pretty good, actually. I was a little worried that it would be too tart, and you do have that tartness in there, but with all the extra sugar that's in there, it makes it so that it's not going to be too tart. And the raisins, the golden raisins, are also not too tart. I did cut back a little bit on the raisin amount because there's supposed to be 2 cups of raisins in there, and I just was not sure about that, so I did maybe a cup and a half. And for me, I think that's a good amount. I think it's fine this way. If you really like raisins, then go for the full 2 cups, right? Oh, let's try it with this. I'm assuming this will also make it less tart. If the sauce didn't get messed up when I was trying to make it, I think that would have been great. Adding this on there definitely is just that nice little extra touch that I feel like it needs to really transport it into a full kind of dessert. So yes, I'm actually pleasantly surprised how this turned out. I'm very happy that it didn't get stuck in the pan and that it turned out looking very pretty and that the taste is actually quite good. So if you're a bread pudding lover, then you're gonna like this. And yeah, so anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in our next video of Hannah's murder mystery, her next adventure. I'm really hoping that one of these days she finally picks a man and gets married, so we'll see if that happens anytime soon. I think we're getting close. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.